Hey everyone, it is Friday and welcome to another edition of Story Time with Miss Leah. We are at the end of our book about the Boxcar Children, so we'll be wrapping that up today. I hope that you've enjoyed those stories. If you missed any of the episodes, you can go back to Monday of this week and you can start there because that's when we started the book. I do not have anything new to show you from nature today. Because can I confess that I haven't even been outside today? I have been cozy in my house, nice and snug and warm. I have looked ahead to the weather and there seems to be a few days of sunshine coming soon. So I am looking forward to those days. We've got a hike planned somewhere nearby. And I also have been talking to some of my friends and they have been doing some crazy stuff with the nature that they have found. We tried one of them. We collected some violets. Do you have violets by your house? So we collected some violets and we had some lemons and we made some violet lemonade out of our violets. And it was pretty tasty. So you can probably look that up online and you can make some violet lemonade. And it's pretty cool because it's kind of like a science project because the water with the violets does not turn a color, but then when you add the lemon to the water, you have a reaction, and that is how you get some pretty colorful lemonade. And I've had some friends that have taken those same violets and then they've made jelly, and then I just got off the phone with another friend who's made jelly out of dandelions. So if you have some dandelions in your yard, maybe you could collect some of those. You can make a treat. I've also heard you can eat the leaves of the dandelion for salad. So those dandelions that are weeding up your yard are mighty tasty if you know what to do with them. Well, I have two poems to read. The first one is called Sowing Seeds. Because yes, we have been planting our flowers outside. I've been waiting until it gets a little bit warmer to put my tomatoes in the ground and my pepper plants, but they are ready to go. And so I thought I would read this poem by Ursula Cornwall, Sowing Seeds. I've dug up all my garden and got the watering pan and packets full of seeds I mean to sow. I'll have marigolds and pansies and Canterbury bells and asters all set neatly in a row. I'll have mignonette and stocks and some tall red hollyhocks if sun and rain will come and help them grow. So hear that, sun? We have rain today, so we need the sun to come to help our things grow. And this poem is called Flower Chorus, and it is by Ralph W. Emerson. Oh, such a commotion under the ground when March called, "Ho there, ho!" Such spreading of rootlets far and wide, such whisperings to and fro. "Are you ready?" the snowdrop asked. "'Tis time to start, you know." "Almost, my dear," the scilla replied. "I'll follow as soon as you go." Then, ha, 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 a chorus came of laughter, sweet and slow, from millions of flowers under the ground. Yes, millions beginning to grow. "I'll promise my blossom," the crocus said, "when I hear the blackbird sing." And straight thereafter Narcissus cried, "My silver and gold I'll bring." And ere they are dulled, another spoke, "The hyacinth bells shall ring." But the violet only murmured, "I'm here," and sweet grew the air of spring. Then, ha, 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 a chorus came of laughter sweet and low, from millions of flowers under the ground, yes, millions beginning to grow. Oh, the pretty brave things, through the coldest days imprisoned in walls of brown, they never lost heart, though the blast shrieked loud, and the sleet and the hail came down. But patiently each wrought her wonderful dress, or fashioned her beautiful crown. And now they are coming to lighten the world, still shadowed by winter's frown. And well may they cheerily laugh, ha, ha, in laughter sweet and low, the millions of flowers under the ground. Yes, millions beginning to grow. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up our story. Now, if you were with us yesterday, the grandfather came into the picture and he now knows where his grandchildren are, but they don't know who he is yet. And our friend Violet is sick with a fever, but the doctor is taking care of her. And it seems like the doctor knew all along where the boxcar children were in the woods. So he's been keeping an eye on them. So we're going to go ahead and finish up our book. Here's the first picture for today. James Henry and Henry James. Dr. Moore went to get his mother. Mother, he said, this is Mr. James Henry Alden. He wants to take his grandchildren to live with him. I'm afraid they won't want to go with you, said Mrs. Moore, until they learn to like you. And they won't want to go while Violet is so sick. Can't I see them? Begged Mr. Alden. I won't tell them who I am. That would help, agreed the doctor. If they grow to like you before they know who you are, then things might be easier. Yes, said Mrs. Moore. Stay here with us for a while. The children will learn to like you, and then we can tell them you are their grandfather. Thank you, said Mr. Alden. I will go home and get some clothes and come back, and I will give you the $5,000. But Dr. Moore would not take the money. I just want these children to be happy, he said. When Mary learned that she was to cook for Mr. Alden, she was frightened. How can I cook for him? She cried. He has everything. He is a very rich man. You can cook for anyone, said Dr. Moore kindly. Just get one of your good chicken dumplings and make some cherry dumplings. At dinner, Mr. Alden saw all his grandchildren but Violet. He smiled with delight when he saw Jessie come into the room in her quiet way. Children, said Mrs. Moore, this is Mr. Henry. Benny laughed. Henry and Mr. Henry, he remarked. That is funny. Henry shook hands with Mr. Alden before he sat down at the table. Where have I seen that man before, he thought. The children liked to hear Mr. Henry talk. He told them about a big cucumber in his garden. The cucumber was growing inside a bottle, and he couldn't get it out. Why not? Asked Benny. It is too big, said Mr. Alden. How did it get in? Asked Benny. Well, it was a little cucumber when it went in, said Mr. Alden. A cucumber will grow just the same in a bottle. It will grow so big that you cannot get it out. I'd like to see the cucumber, said Benny, stopping in the middle of his cherry dumplings. Would you really? Asked Mr. Alden, delighted. Some day you and I will go over and pick it. And there's a picture of the cucumber growing inside of the bottle. And we can bring it to Violet, said Benny. Yes, we can bring it to Violet, agreed Mr. Alden. Henry thought again. Where have I seen that man before? I wish I could remember. He could not remember, but he liked Mr. Alden very much. All the children liked him because he was kind to them. At last, one day, Mr. Alden could see Violet, and he went softly into her room with some beautiful flowers from his garden. The children loved him when he patted Violet's dark head and told her that he was sorry she had been sick. He told her, too, about his garden and where the flowers had come from. I'd like to see your garden, said Violet. I love flowers. How long are you going to stay, Mr. Henry? Asked Benny. Shh, Benny, said Jessie. I want to stay here as long as I can, my boy, said Mr. Alden quietly. Henry looked at the man again. He knew that he had heard him say my boy before. Now where was it? He could not remember. After dinner, Mr. Alden sat under a tree reading. Henry was working in the flower garden in front of the house. He looked at Mr. Alden again and again. Suddenly it came to him as the man smiled over his book. That is the same man who gave me the $25 prize and the silver cup, he said to himself. I didn't remember him at first because I was so excited when he shook hands with me. He took another look at the man again and said, It's the same man. So Henry sat thinking for a little while. Then he got up and went to find Dr. Moore. Do you know who gave me the prize on field day? He asked the doctor. Do you know what his name was? James Alden of the Mills, replied the doctor. J.H. Alden over at Greenfield? He did not look at Henry while he was saying it. Poor Henry was so surprised he almost fell over. That kind man was his grandfather? He went out and sat on the steps to think it over. To begin with, this man was too young. Henry had thought of his grandfather as being a very old man with white hair. And Mrs. Moore had called him Mr. Henry. Could it be that the man knew that he was their grandfather and he hadn't told them? Then he saw that Mr. Alden was getting out of his chair under the trees. It's now or never, thought Henry. I have to know. He walked eagerly after the man, who was going towards the garden with his back to Henry. Then the man turned around and saw how excited Henry was. Are you James Henry Alden of Greenfield? Henry asked. I am, my boy, replied Mr. Alden with a smile. Does that mean you know that you are Henry James Alden? Yes, said Henry quietly. Then James Henry Alden shook hands again with Henry James Alden. Jessie and Benny came across the grass just in time to hear Henry say, But grandfather. Grandfather, cried Jessie. What do you mean, Henry? Yes, Jessie, said Henry eagerly. He's the man we have been running away from all this time. I thought you were old, said Benny, and cross. Jessie said so. I didn't know, Benny, said Jessie. Her face was red. To think of running away from this kind man. But her grandfather did not seem to mind. He patted her on the head and said, Let's go up and visit Violet. There was no stopping Benny. He hurried into Violet's room, holding Mr. Alden by the hand and shouting, It's grandfather, Violet, and he isn't cross after all. What do you mean, asked Violet. Isn't he Mr. Henry? My name is James Henry Alden, replied her grandfather. And my name is Henry James Alden, cried Henry. Very well, said Dr. Moore. Violet held on to her grandfather's hand and listened to the rest talking excitedly. Where have you been living? Asked Mr. Alden at last. They all looked at each other, even Dr. Moore and his mother. Then they all laughed as if they would never stop. You just ought to see, said Dr. Moore. What? Cried all the children at once. You never saw it in the daytime. Is that so? Laughed the doctor. I have seen it many times in the daytime. Seen what? Asked Mr. Alden. Our house, said Jessie. We have been living in a boxcar in the woods. Then they all began to tell him about the dump and the dishes and the brook and the swimming pool. They have 4 beds of pine needles in the car, said Dr. Moore. How do you know? Asked Jessie. Well, said Dr. Moore, the first day Henry worked for me, I walked after him as far as the hill. Why did you do that? Asked Mr. Alden. I liked him, and I saw that he was a fine boy, and I wanted to see where he lived. But you can't see the boxcar from the hill, said Jessie. No, but I came back that night, and I looked around, said Dr. Moore. About 10 o'clock, said Jessie. Yes, said the doctor, I stepped on a stick, and you heard me. A rabbit, cried Jessie and Henry, and Watch barked. Yes, I heard the dog bark, so I knew you were in the boxcar. Then I went home. But you came back? Asked Jessie. Oh, yes, when you were picking cherries, I went up to see your house. I wanted to see if you had enough to eat and enough dishes. Why didn't you tell me? Asked Mr. Alden. Didn't you know that they were my grandchildren? The doctor laughed. Yes, I did, but they were having such a fine time that I didn't want to tell. They got along very well until Violet got sick. Then I told you. Well, I'm glad you did, said Mr. Alden. I have seen your house, too, said Mrs. Moore. I went up one day and saw all your dishes. I liked your big picture and teapot. All of you have seen it but me, said Mr. Alden. We'll show it to you, cried Benny. I'll show you my cart made out of wheels, and my pink cup. Good for you, Benny, said his grandfather, much pleased. When Violet gets well, we'll all go up there. If you will show me your house, I'll show you my house. Do you have a house? Asked Benny in surprise. Yes, and you can live there with me if you like it. I have been looking for you children for a long time. Violet was soon well again, and one afternoon they all started out to see the boxcar. The doctor took them in his car, and many people looked out of their windows to watch Mr. Alden and his grandchildren. They were glad that the children had found such a kind grandfather at last. When they arrived at their old home, they ran around all talking excitedly. Watch sniffed and sniffed all around, looking for the bone he had buried. Everything was the same. Here's the dam for the pool, said Henry to his grandfather. See our building? Shouted Benny, for that was what he called the fireplace. It really burns, too. And this is the refrigerator in the waterfall, and here is my pink cup. They all stepped on the stump and climbed into the car. They looked at the 4 beds and the dishes. Here is the same old pitcher and teapot, said Jessie, laughing. They found the blue tablecloth, and they all sat down by the brook and ate chicken and bread and butter and cookies. And Benny drank milk from his pink cup. Come, we ought to go now, said Dr. Moore at last. The sun is going down, and I don't want Violet to take any more cold. They closed the boxcar door and said goodbye, but they were all sorry to go. Tomorrow, said Mr. Alden, will all of you come to see my house? Oh, yes, cried the children happily. They did not know what a beautiful house it was, and what good times they were going to have in it. The children's grandfather wanted them to like his house. He wanted them to live with him all the time. So, he had made over some of the rooms just for them. The children went with him in his car to see the house. When the car stopped in front of it, Henry cried in surprise, "Do you live here? In this beautiful house?" It was a beautiful house. It was very big, with many trees and flower gardens all around it. "You may live here too, if you'd like my house," remarked his grandfather, watching Henry's face. The house was beautiful inside too. There were flowers everywhere. There were maids everywhere, and the children went up to their bedrooms. "Oh," cried Jessie, "this is Violet's room." It really was Violet's room. There were violets on the wallpaper. The bed was white with a violet cover, and on the table were flowers. "What a beautiful room," cried Violet, sitting down in a soft, pretty chair. All the children shouted when they saw Benny's room. The wallpaper was blue and covered with big rabbits and dogs and bears. There was a rocking horse and a toolbox and little tables and chairs. And an engine stood on a track with cars almost as big as the little boy himself. Benny ran over to the engine. "Can I run this train all day?" he asked. He sat down on the floor by the engine. "Oh, no," said Henry. "You are going to school as soon as it begins." His grandfather laughed. "That is right, my boy. You will like school. You will learn to read." "Oh, I can read now," said Benny. In Jessie's room they found a bed for Watch. It was on the floor by her bed. Watch got in at once, sniffed at the pillow, turned around 3 times, and then lay down. "He likes it," said Jessie. "He will sleep by me." Just then the children heard a doorbell ring. A maid came up to find Mr. Alden. "There's a man to see you," she said, "about the dog." Now when Jessie heard the word dog, she was frightened. She was afraid it was about Watch. "They won't take Watch away," she whispered to Henry. "No, indeed," said Henry. "We'll never, never give him up." Henry and Jessie and the other children went down with their grandfather to see the man. And Jessie was more frightened than ever. Watch did not growl at the man. He jumped up on him delightedly. "You see, he was my dog," said the man, "but I sold him to a lady and he ran away from her that very day. I have to turn him over to the lady I sold him to." "How do you know he is the same dog?" asked Mr. Alden. "Oh, he is my dog," said the man. "You see, he knows me, and he has a small black spot on his foot. But someone has cut his hair on one side." Benny looked. He found the black spot on Watch's foot. "I never saw that spot before," said Henry. "I will give you what you want for the dog," said Mr. Alden. "The children love him, and they want to keep him." "But I already sold him to the lady," said the man. "I must take the dog to her." Then Henry said, "Maybe she will want to change to another dog when she sees his hair. If she will agree to take another dog, will you let my grandfather have this one?" "Why, yes, I will," said the man. "Let's go and ask her, grandfather," said Benny. "She will let Jessie have Watch. He's her dog." She took the thorn out of his foot. The man told Mr. Alden where the lady lived, and they all started out to find her. She was a pretty young lady, and she asked them to sit down. But Benny could not wait. He said, "Please let us keep Watch. I want him, and Jessie wants him, and we didn't know he was your dog." "Why, what do you mean?" asked the lady, laughing. "Who is Watch?" "This dog is Watch," answered Henry. "A man came to my grandfather's house today and told us that he had sold the dog to you. When Watch ran away from you the day you bought him, he came to us. He had a thorn in his foot, and Jessie took it out." Watch looked up at the lady and wagged his tail. When she looked at him, she began to laugh. "Look at his side," she said. "Who cut his hair?" "I'm sorry," said Henry. "Benny did that one day with Violet's scissors." "I'm not sorry," said the lady, laughing. "He looks so funny. And you want to keep him? Is that it?" "Oh, yes," said Jessie eagerly. "The man will let us have him if you will take another dog." "Don't be afraid," said the young lady. "You may keep the dog. I can change to another one." "Oh, thank you. You are nice," cried Benny. He ran to the lady, climbed up in her lap before anyone could stop him. "I'd like to keep you, Benny, in place of the dog," laughed the lady, putting her arms around him. How happy the children were to have Watch to keep. Mr. Alden gave the money to the man at once. 4 happy children sat with their grandfather around the Alden dinner table that night. The maid smiled in the kitchen to hear the children laugh, and the children laughed because Watch had a chair at the table beside Jessie and was really waited on by a maid. Would you ever think that 4 children could be homesick in such a beautiful house? But Jessie was the first one to wish for the old boxcar. One day she said, "Oh, Grandfather, I'd like to cook something once more in the dear old kettle in the woods." "Go out in the kitchen, my dear," said her grandfather. "The maids will help you. You can cook all you want to." Jessie liked this, but it was not like the old days in the boxcar. Then one day Benny said, "Grandfather, I wish I could drink my milk out of my dear old pink cup." His grandfather began to think. He had some pink cups, but they were not so dear to Benny as his old cracked one. At last Mr. Alden said, "I am going to give you children a surprise." "Is it very nice?" asked Benny. "No, not very," laughed his grandfather. "It's not pretty at all." "When will it come?" asked Benny. "It will come today. You children must all go over to Dr. Moore's and stay until the surprise comes." "What can it be?" wondered Violet. Her grandfather laughed. "I hope you will like it," he said. "It's very heavy." The children were glad to see Mrs. Moore and the kind doctor again. They stayed until Mr. Alden said the surprise was ready. Then Dr. Moore and his mother went back with them in their big car. Mr. Alden was happy as a boy. He took them by the garage and through the big gardens, and at last they came to a garden with a fountain in the middle and trees all around it. Near the fountain was the surprise. It was the old boxcar. The children ran over to it with cries of delight, opened the door, and climbed in. All the things were in place. Even the old dead stump was there to step on. Here was the old knife which had cut the butter and the bread and the vegetables and the firewood and the string. Here was Benny's pink cup, and here was his bed. Here were the big kettle and the blue tablecloth, and here were the pitcher and the old teapot, and here was the dinner bell which the children had made from an old tin can. Benny hung it on a tree with a string and rang it over and over again with a spoon. Watch rolled on the floor of the car and barked and barked. Then he began to sniff at everything. "He's looking for the bone he buried," laughed Benny. "How they love the old boxcar," said Mrs. Moore. "I like to see them so happy." "Thank you for the surprise, Grandfather," said Violet. "We'll never go away from you again." "I hope not, my dear," said Mr. Alden. "We can all live happily ever after." And so they did. Well, that is the end of the Boxcar Children. I will be back on Sunday morning with a godly play lesson where we will talk about knowing Jesus in a new way, the after Easter stories. So I hope to see you then, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful weekend and that you get a chance to get outside. Bye-bye.